Hey guys, welcome back. Now we're going to talk about constants in Python, which are variables that should not change. So before we learn about variables, which is a way to store data in our programs, we learn how to reassign them, meaning that you can change the value that the variable stores. But a lot of the time in computer programs, you're going to want to create a variable to store data, but you don't ever want that value to change. So for example, the value of pi, for example, that will never change. Pi is always going to be pi. The acceleration of gravity, stuff like that, right? So constants are simply variables that should not change. And I say should not instead of cannot because in Python, constants are not strictly enforced. So what I mean by that is if you're familiar with other programming languages that have constants in them, the program will not compile if you try reassigning a constant to a different value. It'll just completely error, right? That's not valid. Python, though, does not have that kind of support for constants. It's more of just a convention that people follow, a rule that people follow in their programs to have constants. And I'll show you that in a second, how we can actually use them and create them. Now, in a more recent version of Python, I think it's a Python 3.8, there is technically a type you can put on a variable. And we'll talk about typing later that will make your IDE enforce Python if it has support for that. But again, Python does not strictly enforce constants, okay? So let's just see now how we can actually create constants in Python. So a constant is simply a variable that cannot change. So to create a constant, it's simply a variable. So for example, if we want to store pi, like I said before, you would do capital Pi is equal to 3.14, and you can add as many as you want, 159, however far you want to go. But pi is always going to be pi. Pi is never going to change. It's a universal constant. So to create the constant, we simply create a variable, same as always. We assign a initial value of whatever we want to store. In this case, it's a float. And that's it. Now the key here is that what denotes this as a constant is that it's capitalized. Whenever you create a constant in Python, you know it's a constant because it's capitalized, okay? So for example, we could have other constants that might show up in your programs like, I don't know, gravity if you're doing other math or physics. You could do max requests if it's some sort of like web server or something like that, 1000. You could have URLs, you could have all kinds of things that are constants, right? But anytime you create a constant, you simply make it all caps and then separated by underscores when there's multiple words, okay? So once you have your constant variable, you can then use it in your program, same as always. You can print it out, whatever you want to do with it, do some math with it. Does not matter, anything that you want to do, right? However, if I do pi is equal to 5, I have just now reassigned the constant from 3.14159 to 5, which should not be allowed, but like I said, Python does not strictly enforce constants, okay? So it's technically allowed, but it's not something that you should ever see in a professional program, okay? You should not ever see that. So if you ever create a constant, name it correctly, and then you'll see it in your program and you know not to reassign it. And then other people that use those variables or those constants know not to reassign it as well, okay? Here's some more examples on how you can use constants in your program. So we could have a variable that does change, like the radius, the circle area, we can calculate from that radius. So pi, the constant, times the radius, and then to the power of 2. So with that formula, we used our constant to come up with the circle area based on the radius. And then we could say area of circle with radius, circle area. So here we're using string formatting. I have not gone over that yet, but it's just a way of making strings just easier. So we'll learn more about that later. Don't worry about it. But let's run this program. And here we go. We get area of circle with radius 5, 78.54. Nice. So it's really that easy. As you can see, it's the same as any other variable that you've ever created so far. Here's one more example. So if we have a distance variable, we can use the gravity constant to calculate the fall time, something that I did in like physics in high school. It's been a long time, but this is how you do it, fall time, and then you can print it out just like we did with the other one. So we're using our constant just like any other variable, okay? All right, so last thing I'll show you guys is, like I said, in newer versions of Python, you can see stuff like this from typing import final. So what we're doing here is importing the final class from the typing module. Don't worry about this at all. We're going to be learning about it later. It's just a way of bringing in something from an outside source, okay? So Python has built-in support for this thing called final. So if you want to, you can do, for example, pi, and you can mark it as final, and then 3.14, and then we need to make sure that we comment out the previous code here because it's conflicting. So control slash, comment that out. So what we're doing here is we're creating a new constant pi like we did above, except that now we're adding this final thing to it to mark it as a constant. So what this does here is tells your IDE if it has Python support, such as VS Code that we're currently using or PyCharm. This will tell your IDE that this is a constant. So if I try doing now pi is equal to 5, it's going to complain. It's saying pi is declared as final and cannot be reassigned. Final is just another name for constant that other languages use, okay? So like I said though, if I go ahead and print this out, I can run this program and there will be no error because again, Python does not explicitly enforce constants, but if you add this type hint here, it'll tell your IDE to enforce it for you so that it'll complain, but you can still compile it and run the program no problem, okay? So we'll be learning all about typing in the future. So this doesn't have to be something that you have to memorize. Don't worry about that. But as long as you know what constants are, what they're for, you're good to go. Okay. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully you guys found this video interesting. See you guys next time, and peace.